The great common room of the Xylos Galactic Exchange was a symphony of alien life. The air itself seemed thick with it, carrying 100 different scents from 100 different worlds. There was the sweet smell of Volani pollen, the sharp ozone tang of the Zil, and the deep, musky odor of the Kthar. Sounds mixed together in a low, constant hum. The gentle, musical clicks of the Volani language, the dry chittering of the Zil, and the low, rumbling growls of the Kthar all blended into the background noise of the place. On the upper levels, walkways crisscrossed the open space. Beings of all shapes and sizes moved along them. Some floated, some skittered, some walked on 2 legs or 4 or 6. The light from the central crystal sphere cast shifting colors over everything, painting the scene in soft blues and greens. In a quiet corner, away from the main flow of traffic, a young human girl sat alone. Her name was Ji. She was small compared to many of the other beings, with dark hair and calm eyes. She sat at a small table, her hands folded in her lap, simply watching the alien flora in a nearby biosphere display. Strange, glowing plants twisted slowly in the contained environment. She was the first human to ever come to the exchange. To all the beings here, she was a Deathworlder. This was a title that carried great weight. It meant her home planet, Earth, was a place of extreme danger. It was a Class 12 world, the highest and most deadly classification. The files said her world had crushing gravity, violent weather, and predators that could tear a being apart. To the other species, Ji was not just a student. She was a living specimen from a nightmare world. Because of this, a wide space always existed around her. It was like an invisible bubble. No one sat at her table. No one stood too close. They looked at her with a mix of fear and cold curiosity. They saw her dense bone structure on their scanners. They read about her hyperreactive nervous system. They knew her muscles were far stronger for her size than should be possible. These were not things to admire. They were things to be wary of. A group of 3 Kthar students watched her from across the room. The Kthar were a large, reptilian species, covered in thick, scaly hide. They were strong and proud. The leader of the group was named Gorv. He was the son of an important ambassador, and he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. "Look at it," Gorv rumbled, his voice a low vibration. "So still, so quiet. Does it even understand where it is?" His companion, a smaller Kthar named Bork, shifted his weight. "The files say they are intelligent, but their world, it is a place of pure chaos. It must have shaped a chaotic mind." Near them, a pair of Volani observed the exchange. The Volani were slender and elegant, with skin that looked like polished crystal. They were known as diplomats and scientists. The female, named Su Min, watched with a gentle frown. They should leave her be. She is not here for their amusement. Her companion, a male named June, nodded slowly. "It is a fascinating study in interaction, is it not? The predator species confronting the unknown. But Gorv's methods are unrefined." Gorv decided it was time for a closer look. He pushed himself away from his table and began to walk towards Ji's corner. His 2 friends followed him. The movement caught the attention of others in the common room. The gentle hum of conversation began to die down. A Zil, a slender insectoid being named Crix, paused its work on a datapad to watch. This was becoming a spectacle. Ji did not look up as they approached. She continued to watch the glowing plants, her expression peaceful. Gorv stopped at the edge of her table. He was massive, towering over her seated form. His shadow fell across her. "Deathworlder," Gorv said, the word a growl. "We have questions for you." Slowly, Ji lifted her head. Her dark eyes met his slitted yellow ones. She did not seem afraid. She did not seem angry. She simply looked at him. "Yes?" she asked. Her voice was soft, but clear. Gorv leaned forward, placing his heavy, clawed hands on the table. The polymer surface creaked under his weight. "Tell us, how does it feel to be crafted by chaos? Are you as dangerous as your file suggests?" A small, almost invisible smile touched Ji's lips. It was a calm smile, patient smile. "It feels like home," she said simply. Her quiet answer seemed to annoy Gorv. He had expected fear. He had expected a reaction. This calmness felt like a challenge. The other Kthar moved closer, forming a loose half-circle around the table. They were not attacking. They were just surrounding her, encircling the Deathworld girl. The invisible bubble of space was gone. From her vantage point, Sumin the Villani felt a twist of concern. "This is not right, June. They are trying to provoke her." June watched, his crystalline fingers steepled. "And if they do? We have only theoretical data on human aggression. This could be most informative." Gorv's eyes scanned Ji. He saw her simple clothes, her calm hands, the plain metal pin that held her dark hair in a neat bun. He needed to get a reaction. He needed to prove that underneath that calm surface was the volatile beast the files described. "Your composure is an interesting trick," he sneered, leaning in even closer. His snout was now only inches from her face. She could smell his musky breath. "But we have read the reports. Your kind are all predators. It must be a constant struggle to hide it." The Zil, Crix, skittered a step closer, his multifaceted eyes gleaming. "A test," he chittered. "A simple stimulus test. To see the true nature." Gorv's eyes fell upon the hairpin. It was a simple, unremarkable object. To him, it was a symbol of her false calm. In a quick, deliberate motion, his clawed hand darted out. He did not touch her. Instead, he snatched the metal pin from her hair. There was a soft sound, and Ji's dark hair tumbled down, framing her face. Gorv held the pin between his thick claws, a look of triumph on his face. He tossed it onto the table between them. It landed with a faint clatter. The entire common room was silent now. Every eye was on the corner. Every being watched the Deathworlder, waiting for the explosion. This was the ultimate disrespect, an invasion of her personal space. This would surely break her control. He did not move for a long moment. Her hair fell around her shoulders. Her eyes, which had been soft and calm, changed. They did not narrow in anger. They did not widen in fear. Instead, they seemed to flatten. The light in them seemed to harden. They became like dark, still pools of water on a cold night. She slowly lowered her gaze from Gorv's face to the hairpin lying on the table. The silence stretched, tight as a wire. Then, she moved. The silence in the common room was now absolute. The only sound was the low, ever-present hum of the life support systems. It was a sound everyone usually ignored, but now it seemed as loud as a starship engine. All the gentle clicks, chitters, and rumbles of conversation had died away. Every eye, from the multifaceted orbs of the Zil to the slitted pupils of the Kthar, was locked on the scene in the corner. Gorv stood over the seated girl, his chest puffed out. He felt the weight of the room's attention, and it fed his confidence. He had done it. He had broken the Deathworlder's unnatural calm. Her hair was down, a small sign of disorder. The hairpin, the tool of her neatness, lay on the table between them like a trophy. He watched her face, waiting for the storm. He expected to see the mask slip. He expected to see the rage that the files promised. Ji did not look at him. Her gaze was fixed on the hairpin. Her dark hair framed her face, making her seem smaller, more vulnerable. But her expression was not one of vulnerability. The softness was completely gone from her features. Her face was like stone. Her eyes were dark and impossibly focused, as if the entire universe had shrunk down to that single, simple object. The two other Kthar, Bork and the one named Drog, shifted nervously. They had been eager for a show, but the quality of the silence was wrong. It was not the silence of fear or submission. It was the silence of deep, cold water before a tidal wave. Bork glanced at Gorv, a silent question in his eyes, but Gorv was too focused on his prize to notice that Sumin, the Villani, felt a chill. Her crystalline skin seemed to grow colder. She had seen conflicts before, but they were loud, full of posturing and noise. This was different. The human was not making a sound. She was not even breathing heavily. She was just still. It was a stillness that felt more dangerous than any movement. "June," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "This is a mistake." June, for the first time, looked uncertain. His scientific curiosity was being replaced by a primal unease. "The data did not describe this type of response," he murmured back. "There is no physiological sign of rage. Her biosigns are elevated but controlled. It is strange." The Zill Crix took a skittering step closer, his thin limbs moving with quick, jerky motions. He was fascinated. This was a new data point. "Observe the tension in the shoulder muscles." He chittered quietly to no one in particular. "A clear fight-or-flight precursor. The stimulus is working." Gorv misinterpreted her stillness for shock. He leaned in closer, his large body casting her in shadow. The smell of him, of dry scales and musk, was overwhelming. "What is wrong, Deathworlder?" he growled, his voice dripping with mock concern. "Has the chaos inside you gotten lost? Can you not find your famous anger?" He reached out a single, thick claw and tapped it on the table next to the hairpin. "Top, top, top." The sound was like a small hammer in the quiet room. "Perhaps you are not what your file says," Gorv continued, his voice growing louder, wanting the whole room to hear. "Perhaps you are just a quiet thing from a loud world, a broken creature." He looked around at the crowd, a smirk on his reptilian face. He was winning. He was proving that the Deathworlder was not so fearsome. He was showing them all that he, Gorv, was not afraid. Ji's eyes finally lifted from the hairpin. They moved slowly, traveling up from the table, past Gorv's tapping claw, up his muscular arm, and finally settling on his face. Her gaze was not fiery. It was not wild. It was cold and flat and utterly focused. It was the gaze of a person who was no longer being bothered by a bully, but was instead assessing a problem that needed to be solved. Gorv's smirk faltered for a second. Her look was not what he expected. There was no hate in it. There was no fear. There was only a calm, terrifying certainty. "You took something of mine," she said. Her voice was still quiet, but it was different now. The softness was gone. It was low and clear, like a sharp piece of ice. It cut through the air and reached every corner of the silent room. Gorv blinked, surprised by the directness. He recovered quickly, puffing out his chest. "It is just a trinket, primitive thing. I was curious. On my world, we share our possessions freely." "It was not yours to take," Ji replied. Her tone was factual, not emotional. She was stating a simple truth. "This?" Gorv laughed, a harsh, grating sound. He picked up the hairpin again, holding it between his thumb and forefinger. "This little piece of metal? You would defend this? Proves my point. You are possessive. You are territorial. Just like the predators in your world's files." He waved the pin in the air. "See? This is what comes from a death world. A deep need to claim things, to own things. It is a small, petty instinct." Ji's head tilted just a fraction. It was a small movement, but in the absolute stillness of her body, it seemed huge. "It is not about the metal," she said. "It is about the action. You thought you could take something from me to prove a point. You thought it would be easy." Gorv felt a flicker of real anger now. She was not playing her part. She was supposed to be scared or furious. She was supposed to break. Instead, she was talking to him like he was a misbehaving child. He leaned in until his face was once again dangerously close to hers. "Everything is easy with your kind," he snarled, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You are simple creatures. Stimulus. Response. I provide the stimulus." He gestured to himself. "And you," he gestured to her, "will give the response. So give it. Show us the beast. Show us the chaos." He dropped the hairpin again. It clattered onto the tabletop, spinning for a moment before coming to a stop. "Show us," he demanded, his voice rising to a roar that echoed in the quiet room. The air was thick with tension. The crowd held its breath. This was the moment, the breaking point. Bork and Drog tensed, ready for the violent reaction. Crix watched, his datapad forgotten, his whole body leaning forward. Sumin closed her eyes, unable to watch. He looked from Gorv's angry face down to the hairpin. Then she moved. The movement was not what anyone expected. There was no loud cry, no roar of anger. There was no dramatic standing up, no overturning of the table. He did not launch herself at Gorv with teeth and nails, as the stories of Deathworld beasts suggested she might. Instead, it was a single, fluid motion. It was so fast that the eye could barely register the individual parts. It was a blur of quiet, terrifying efficiency. Her right hand, which had been resting in her lap, flashed out. It did not move toward Gorv's face or his throat. It moved to the table. Her fingers closed around the hairpin. There was no fumbling. No hesitation. It was as if her hand and the pin were two magnets snapping together in the very same instant. Her arm moved. It was not a wild swing. It was a short, brutally powerful thrust straight downward. Her entire body seemed to focus into that one arm, that one hand, that one point. The sound that followed was not the light clatter of metal on polymer. It was a deep, solid thwack. It was the sound of something being driven with immense force into something that was not meant to be pierced. It was a short, sharp, final sound that cut through the humming silence of the room and left a deeper silence in its wake. The hairpin was no longer lying on the table. The blunt end of it was now buried a full inch deep into the solid polymer surface. A spiderweb of fine white cracks radiated out from the point of impact, spreading across the table like frost on a window. The entire action, from the moment her hand left her lap to the moment the sound echoed and died, took less than a second, and then, stillness again. His hand rested on the table, her fingers lightly touching the now embedded pin. She had not even risen from her seat. She was still sitting, her hair framing a face that was as calm and composed as it had been when she was watching the plants. Her breathing was even. She looked at the pin, then slowly lifted her eyes to Gorv. The room was frozen. Gorv was still leaning over the table, his body rigid. His triumphant sneer was stuck on his face, but the meaning behind it was gone, replaced by pure, uncomprehending shock. His brain, both the clever part and the ancient reptilian part, was screaming a single, clear message. The message was not about victory or pride. The message was about survival. He had seen it. He had seen the blur of motion. He had felt the slight vibration in the table through his claws. He looked at the hairpin. That simple, blunt piece of metal was now a monument. He understood, with a clarity that chilled his blood, that the polymer of the table was far stronger than the bone of his skull. He understood that the motion which buried the pin in the table could have just as easily buried it in his eye. He was still alive because her hand had moved toward the table, and not toward him. The two other Kthar, Bork and Drog, took a stumbling step backward. Their tough hides felt suddenly thin and fragile. They looked at the small human girl not as a curiosity, but as a contained force of nature they had been foolishly poking. The Zil, Crix, let out a sharp, involuntary click. His multifaceted eyes could process the movement no better than anyone else's. He had recorded it, but the data was just a streak of motion, a spike of impossible force. The theoretical numbers in the human file were no longer theoretical. They were real, and they were terrifying in their quiet application. Sumin opened her eyes. She saw the scene, but it took a moment for her mind to understand. She saw Gorv frozen. She saw the two other Kthar backing away. She saw the hairpin standing upright in the table, a tiny flag planted in a conquered land. And she saw GE, sitting with a stillness that was now profoundly different. It was not the stillness of peace. It was the stillness of a storm that had passed, leaving everyone else shattered in its wake. June was no longer leaning forward with scientific interest. He was standing perfectly straight, his crystalline fingers pressed to his mouth. All his theories, all his clinical observations vanished. He was not seeing a subject for study anymore. He was seeing a being of such immense, controlled power that it made his head spin. The stimulus had been given. The response had been measured. And it had redefined the entire experiment. No one in the common room made a sound. No one whispered. No one moved. The colorful light from the central sphere continued to play over the scene, but it felt like a mockery now. The cheerful, normal light had no place here. They had encircled the Deathworld girl. They had pushed her. They had demanded a show of her famous, volatile nature. And she had given them one dot, but it was not the show of chaos they expected. It was not a wild, uncontrolled explosion. It was the opposite. It was a display of such perfect, precise, and restrained force that it sucked the air from the room. She had not lost control. She had demonstrated it. With one movement, she had shown them the gap between the stories they told about her world and the reality of what it took to survive there. She had moved once, and the room had fallen silent. The silence felt heavy, like a physical weight pressing down on everyone in the room. It was a thick, uncomfortable silence, full of unspoken fear and shock. The echo of the thwack was gone from the air, but it was still ringing in every mind. Gorv remained frozen, bent over the table. He could not look away from the embedded hairpin. His heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The part of him that was an ambassador's son was gone. The part of him that was a proud Kthar student was gone. All that was left was the ancient animal that had just seen a predator move and knew how close it had come to death. His muscles were locked. He could not even blink. He slowly uncurled her fingers from around the hairpin. She did not look at the crowd. She did not look at the terrified Kthar standing behind Gorv. Her dark, calm eyes were fixed only on Gorv. She looked at him for a long moment, letting him feel the full weight of her gaze. Then, she stood up. It was not a sudden jump. It was a smooth, unhurried motion. As she rose, the circle of aliens around her flinched back as one. It was not a conscious decision. It was a reflex. They were like leaves pushed back by a sudden, quiet wind. The space around her, which had been forcefully taken from her, was now given back to her in a rush of fear. She was not tall. She was still much smaller than Gorv. But in that moment, she seemed to tower over him. She looked at his frozen form, then down at the table. "On my world," she said. Her voice was low and clear. It was not loud, but in the perfect silence, every word was sharp and distinct. "We learn control before we learn to walk." She paused, letting the words sink in. The meaning was clear. The incredible force she had just shown was not the most important part. The most important part was the control. The decision to hit the table and not him. She gestured with her chin toward the hairpin. "That pin was my grandmother's. It is a memory. It is a connection to my family. It is not a toy for you to play with." Her eyes locked back onto his. "You will not touch my things again." It was not a request. It was a statement of fact. A new rule for the universe, stated quietly by a girl from a death world. Gorv finally managed to move. He took a jerky step backward, breaking his frozen posture. He did not say a word. He could not. His pride was shattered. All his arrogance had vanished, replaced by a deep, humbling understanding of his own foolishness. He then turned her head. She slowly scanned the room. She looked at the huddled Kthar. She looked at the stunned Zil Krix. Her gaze moved over the many other species, their faces a mixture of awe and terror. She looked at Sumin and June, the Villani observers. She made eye contact with several of them. "You call my world a death world," she said, her voice carrying easily through the large space. "You are not wrong. My planet is dangerous. The gravity is strong. The animals are fierce. The weather can kill you in a minute." She took a small step forward, and the crowd seemed to lean back again. "But you misunderstand. You think we conquered death through brutality. You think we are strong because we fight and kill." She shook her head slowly. "That is not how we survived." She looked down at her own hand, then back at the crowd. "We survived through respect. Respect for the gravity that could crush us if we are not careful. Respect for the predators that could hunt us if we are not aware. And respect for the force." She glanced at the table. "The force that we must carefully contain within ourselves every single moment, every breath, every step, every movement." She looked directly at Gorv again. "You wanted to see a predator. You wanted to see the beast from the scary stories. She gave a small, cold smile. You only saw a fraction of the control required not to be one. You only saw a small, quiet warning. She let her words hang in the air. No one moved. No one dared to speak. They were all listening. They were finally hearing her, not as a specimen but as a person. A person from a world they could not imagine, explaining a truth they had never considered. The idea was revolutionary to them. They had always thought of a Deathworlder as a creature of pure, unleashed power. They never imagined that the real power was in the leashing. They never imagined that the daily life of a human was a constant, conscious act of holding back, of being careful, of showing respect to a universe that was constantly trying to kill them. The table, with its cracked surface and deeply buried pin, was no longer just a display of strength. It was a lesson in forbearance. A lesson in mercy. Ge had said what she needed to say. The silence was now a different kind. It was not the silence of fear anymore. It was the silence of people thinking very, very hard. E looked at the hairpin one last time. Then she reached down. Her fingers closed around the part that was still sticking out of the table. She did not yank it. She did not struggle. She simply pulled with a firm and steady pressure. There was a small, gritty sound as the pin came free from the cracked polymer. She held it in her palm for a moment, looking at it. Then, she carefully tucked it into a small pocket on her clothing. She did not look at Gorv again. She did not look at any of them. She turned and walked away from the table. Her steps were quiet and measured. She did not walk fast. She did not walk slow. She just walked. The crowd of aliens parted for her. It was not a slow parting. It was immediate. Beings moved aside quickly, creating a wide path for her to walk through. No one stood in her way. No one made a sound. They watched her go, their eyes wide. They watched the small human girl with the dark hair walk through the middle of the common room as if she were the only person there. She reached the large archway that led out of the common room and turned the corner. She was gone. For a long time, no one moved. The silence continued. It was a deep, thoughtful silence now. The humming of the life support systems seemed to return to normal volume, filling the space where conversation should be. Gorv finally let out a shaky breath. It was a loud sound in the quiet. He straightened his body, his joints aching from being frozen for so long. He could not bring himself to look at anyone. His face felt hot with shame and relief. He turned without a word and walked quickly toward the exit on the far side of the room. He did not want to be there anymore. His two friends, Bork and Drog, shuffled after him, their heads low. They looked like completely different beings from the proud, swaggering group that had approached the table just minutes before. The spell was broken. Slowly, carefully, the other beings in the common room began to move. But they did not go back to their conversations right away. They gathered in small, quiet groups. They whispered. Their eyes kept drifting back to the table in the corner. The table was the center of attention. The hole where the hairpin had been was a dark, perfect circle. The web of cracks spreading out from it was a white map of the force that had been used. It was proof. It had really happened. Sumin and June, the Villani, walked slowly toward the table. They stopped a few feet away, just looking at it. Sumin hugged her arms around herself. "I was wrong," she said softly. "We were all wrong." June nodded, his crystalline face reflecting the fractured surface of the table. "The data was incomplete," he murmured. "We measured their strength, their speed, their bone density. But we never measured that." He pointed a slender finger at the table, not at the hole, but at the empty space where Ge had been sitting. "We never measured the restraint." Nearby, the Zil Crix was staring at his datapad. He had recorded the entire event. He played it back, watching the blur of motion again and again. He analyzed the speed. He calculated the force required to drive a blunt metal pin that deep into reinforced polymer. The numbers were staggering. They were far beyond what was in any official file. He looked from his screen to the table, and then toward the door where Ge had left. A new kind of respect, cold and scientific, settled in his mind. This was not a creature to be tested. It was a force to be understood. Sumin turned to June. her voice firm now. "The briefings on the humans. The one all the diplomats read. It calls them volatile. It says they are prone to uncontrolled aggression." June looked at her, understanding what she was about to say. "That word is wrong," Sumin stated. "It is a dangerous and foolish word. It makes them sound like unstable chemicals. What we saw today was not volatility." She looked at the table. It was the opposite of volatility. It was absolute control. She showed more control in that 1 second than Gorv has shown in his entire life. She looked her companion directly in the eye. "Revise the human brief," she said, her voice clear and decided. "Remove the term volatile. Remove it from all our records. Replace it with forbearance. They are not creatures of uncontrolled rage. They are beings of immense, conscious restraint." June considered this for a moment, then nodded again, more firmly this time. "You are right. We did not encounter a monster today. We were not attacked by a beast." He looked toward the exit, a look of awe on his face. "We were granted a lesson in mercy, and we were too blind to see it until she showed us." The story of what happened spread through the Xylos exchange faster than any official communication. It was told in hushed tones in the dining halls. It was discussed in quiet groups in the learning centers. The tale of the human girl and the hairpin became a legend. From that day on, things were different. No one at the exchange ever called Ji just a Deathworlder again. When they saw her walking the halls or sitting in a class or reading in the garden, they called her by her name. They said Ji, and they said it with respect. They no longer saw a specimen from a planet of death. They saw a person who carried a great and quiet power inside her. A person who had every reason to be angry, but who chose to be calm. A person who had shown them that the most terrifying strength is not the strength to destroy, but the strength to hold back. She had moved once, and the room had fallen silent. And in that silence, everyone had finally learned to listen.